It's getting messy in the world of Subnautica 2. The game was announced in October 2024 to be released into early access in 2025. Upon launch into early access, there was going to be multiplayer support, several biomes, and with 2 or 3 years of early access iterations scheduled before a full 1.0 release of Subnautica 2. At least, that was the plan. Jump to 9 months later and a horrible, litigious, metaphorical baby made of drama and allegations has been born. The leadership team has been ousted from Unknown World's womb, and they're pissed, but although it first looked like Krafton were being almost melodramatically evil, information has come out that casts the leadership team in a dodgy light. Starting at Chapter 1, the surprise firing of the core leadership team came on the 2nd of July. This team was made up of Charlie Cleveland, who founded the studio in 2001 and has variously served as designer, programmer, team lead, chief executive officer, Subnautica game director, and franchise creative director, along with chief executive officer Ted Gill and special projects director Max McGuire. They were replaced by Steve Papoutsis, previously the CEO of Striking Distance Studios, who made the Callisto Protocol. Now, Krafton obviously released a statement to announce that the leadership team were being let go, and within this statement there are shady clues that it wasn't happy with Unknown World's planned timeline for the development of Subnautica 2. There are references to owing players nothing less than the best possible game as soon as possible, as well as talk of delivering the right game at the right time. 2 particular sentences are telling. They read, as part of its oversight, Krafton is committed to achieving regular milestones to assess progress across its creative studios. These reviews, based on clearly defined metrics and targets, will help ensure that games meet both creative and quality standards. The particular phrase, reviews based on clearly defined metrics and targets, sounds to me like it implies that these weren't in place beforehand, at least not to Krafton's standards. The mention of oversight and milestones in Krafton's statement is notable as well, seemingly hinting that this is what the game has been lacking so far. It has the vibe of being put on a personal improvement plan at work, if you know what I mean, or being given a star chart to keep track of how many of your chores you were doing as a kid. If you fulfill the requirements of your job or do your chores without being asked, theoretically you wouldn't be put on either of those, right? Unless you have an evil manager or are being managed out of a company, which is honestly very possible in this dystopian job market. But either way, the way the statement is phrased is fishy. So the core leadership team didn't see any of this coming. On the 5th of July, Charlie Cleveland expressed their collective shock on Reddit, but it sounds like this was actually a long time coming from Krafton, as we will find out in due course. Cleveland wrote on Reddit, so you can see why for Max, Ted, myself, the Unknown Worlds team, and for our community, the events of this week have been quite a shock. We know that the game is ready for early access release, and we know you're ready to play it. And while we thought this was going to be our decision to make, at least for now, the decision is in Krafton's hands. And after all these years, to find that I'm no longer able to work at the company I started stings. It's important to point out that at this point, I think it's fair to say that people were on the leadership team side. With all of the redundancies happening in the game industry at the moment, the default setting is most definitely big companies suck, and sympathy with those who were let go. Publishers are definitely the bad guy at the moment. This isn't helped by a report by Bloomberg that alleges this leadership team was fired only a couple of months before Krafton was expected to pay the development team a $250 million bonus, which would have applied had the studio met certain revenue targets by the end of 2025. And considering Subnautica 2 is meant to be coming out at the end of 2025, they would have presumably met that target. Which sounds like a big deal, so just put a pin in that for now. 8 days later, Krafton delays Subnautica 2. Krafton says this is because Subnautica 2 is not ready in its current state and needs to be expanded, and because the release date has been pushed back, Unknown Worlds is unlikely to meet the revenue targets the bonus was predicated upon because the game isn't coming out this year, meaning that no developers get any bonuses. According to Bloomberg, this delay was not supported by the former leadership at Unknown Worlds, who had planned to share the bonus with all studio employees. So, Cleveland, Gill, and McGuire claim that they were going to share this bonus of $250 million with their development team. Krafton is looking worse and worse by the second, right? Remember that pin? put it back in. One day after delaying Subnautica 2, Krafton releases a bombshell of a statement, blasting Cleveland, Gill, and Maguire. Side note, publishers are allergic to controversy. Taking a stand means people may dislike the stand you're taking and withhold their dollars accordingly, so publishers do have a tendency to act like a blank, neutral block of beige and let controversy just wash over them. Yeah, not in this case. Krafton releases a statement that accuses the leadership team of abandoning Subnautica 2, bold words, reveals that these 3 men were due to get 90% of that $250 million bonus, and calls the leadership change inevitable. The implication here is that the leadership team were lying about giving lots of that bonus to the staff, and Krafton is essentially calling them out, saying that they would have gotten 90% of that bonus no matter what the number was. Here's the direct quote from Krafton's statement. In addition to the initial $500 million purchase price, we allocated approximately 90% of the up to $250 million earnout compensation to the 3 former executives, with the expectation that they would demonstrate leadership and active involvement in the development of Subnautica 2. So, another side note, Cleveland has now spun the bonus situation as saying that he would pay a share of the profits of Subnautica 2 with the Unknown World staff, which is still good, but it's definitely not the same as sharing a $250 million bonus with staff. The statement by Krafton then goes on to state, however, regrettably the former leadership abandoned the responsibilities entrusted to them. Subnautica 2 was originally planned for an early access launch into early 2024, but the timeline has since been significantly delayed. Now this is where things get juicy. Krafton made multiple requests to Charlie and Max to resume their roles as game director and technical director respectively, but both declined to do so. I'll remind you, this is an official statement from Krafton. In particular, following the failure of Moonbreaker, Krafton asked Charlie to devote himself to the development of Subnautica 2. However, instead of participating in the game development, he chose to focus on a personal film project. Continuing, Krafton believes that the absence of core leadership has resulted in repeated confusion in direction and significant delays in the overall project schedule. The current early access version also falls short in terms of content volume. So, let's talk about why Cleveland, Gill and Maguire were accused of, quote, abandoning the project. Cleveland in particular has had his interests elsewhere for a while, it would appear. He has been creating an AI slop independent comedy Christmas movie with a god-awful AI-generated poster, and he couldn't even be bothered to Photoshop it so that mistletoe was spelled correctly. He also came out with another game during the development of Subnautica 2 named Moonbreaker, which was based on material by Brandon Sanderson, who's a legend, and this game received positive reviews. But he's also stated publicly before being fired that Subnautica 2 is not his full focus. For example, in an interview about Moonbreaker with Polygon, Charlie said this: I needed to switch away from Subnautica. I've been working on it for 5 years as intensely as I have been working on Moonbreaker for 5 years. But this one I want to keep working on, and he's talking about Moonbreaker there, I think. I love Subnautica, but those 5 years were really tough. So he's not giving a great impression as to what he feels about Subnautica at the moment. It sounds like it's more of a chore for him. He continues, we wanted to make a game that's going to last a decade or longer. Subnautica couldn't do that because it just wasn't designed to be expanded. I don't think I'll be working this much on it. I mean, Mark Rosewater is the chief designer of Magic, and he's been doing it for 20 years. He's not slowing down, he's doing these daily podcasts in his car. Who knows? I could be that guy. So that makes it sound like he doesn't want to work on Subnautica for an extended amount of time. I could be wrong, but let me know what you think in the comments. On the website for Cleveland's AI slop film studio named Abyssal, he says as follows: I absolutely love making games but wanted to try something new. At the end of 2023, I left San Francisco after almost 20 years and moved to Los Angeles to reset my life. Instead of taking it easy, I now find myself working on multiple film projects. Do you really? It's amazing how fast it's all happening. Being right in the thick of things makes it so much easier to meet like-minded people. So it seems obvious to point out, but I'm gonna say it anyway, Cleveland's focus was obviously not on Subnautica 2. He's talking about films he's making, about meeting people in films in LA, which he moved to, and he's talking about his other game, Moonbreaker, in what seems like a far more positive light than continued development in Subnautica 2. Basically, it sounds to me that Cleveland was off working on other things and not giving Subnautica 2 his full attention like Krafton requested. Okay, back to the timeline. On July the 11th, the leadership team launches a lawsuit against Krafton on the same day that Krafton releases their statement revealing the alleged behaviour, of the fired leadership team. This lawsuit basically says Krafton fired them for no good reason and they want money. 2 days after that, Krafton confirms that a leaked document is real. This leaked document is an internal milestone review conducted as part of the Subnautica 2 project, and Krafton says that given the circumstances around it, they've determined that transparent communication is necessary and has chosen to confirm the authenticity of the document. The document purports to show where the development of Subnautica 2 was deemed to be versus the expectation at the point in the development cycle. It criticises the as-is position, saying that while the game includes a variety of content, it currently lacks the freshness and volume expected of a sequel, and falls short of meeting the high expectations of the OWSC and the Asian market. It also clearly states that it expects a content volume increase of over 30% compared to version 1.0. At the bottom of the second slide, the author, who remains unknown, states that compared to the originally planned EA launch specifications, the current target content volume has been reduced or adjusted across various elements, such as biomes, creatures, equipment and progression, and features. Due to a gap between the current state and the content volume assumed during the initial launch planning, it's necessary to reassess the release timeline and the roadmap. So basically, confirming the authenticity of this leaked document proves that Subnautica 2 couldn't have been released at the end of 2025, regardless of what happened within the leadership team, because there wasn't enough content in the game, allegedly. Okay, so 3 days after that, Cleveland then releases their full legal suit on Reddit, which you think would be a good thing for transparency, but it kind of wasn't. This negative response ensues because the legal suit is odd. It relies really heavily on emotive language that generates outrage rather than relying on facts, which is what a lawsuit is supposed to be composed of, because judges don't care how many adjectives you use, they just want facts. So people on Reddit read through the lawsuit, and if you go to the thread, you will see that a lot of the responses are skeptical about the legitimacy of the claims that Cleveland and the team are putting forward. Allegedly, allegedly, allegedly. But from the lawsuit, we can glean that Charlie Cleveland accuses the publisher of deliberately hindering the Subnautica 2 project in order to avoid paying out a $250 million bonus. So he's saying that that internal project milestone thing that they leaked was contrived by Krafton so they wouldn't have to pay the $250 million bonus. So he alleges that the game was ready to release and it was fine. But Krafton obviously disagrees. This lawsuit also claims that that film that Cleveland was working on was actually a Subnautica movie that the publisher is said to have specifically asked the studio to develop. But the Subnautica movie isn't mentioned anywhere on the Abyssal Films website, which is suspicious, but maybe it was under NDA, I really couldn't speak to that. The lawsuit also alleges that things began to turn sour in early 2025, when Gil started negotiating bonuses for employees who weren't eligible under the original acquisition terms, which is a good thing. That's a good guy thing to do. It's alleged that the combination of Subnautica's release on mobile and Switch 2, alongside the impending early access launch of Subnautica 2, meant that the studio was now presenting Krafton with revenue projections significantly higher than Unknown World's initial conservative estimates. It's claimed that this is the point that Krafton began pushing to delay Subnautica 2 into 2026, halted its publishing duties, including marketing and localization, and refused to support Subnautica 2's planned summer release. So you can see how the leadership team are structuring this so that it looks like Krafton intentionally delayed the release of Subnautica 2 so that they wouldn't have to pay out this bonus. That's what they're saying, allegedly. It also gets even more juicy because the lawsuit alleges that a senior Krafton executive told Gil that pulling the resources was a permissible way for the company to avoid supporting the earnout. So essentially, Gil is saying that he has an admission by a senior Krafton executive that yes, they did all this on purpose so they wouldn't have to pay the bonus. So the lawsuit basically comes down to Cleveland, Gil and Maguire alleging that Subnautica 2 was ready for release, but Krafton intentionally and purposefully delayed the release of Subnautica 2 so they wouldn't have to pay the bonus, and fired the leadership team so that the game could be delayed. But Krafton disagrees with this, saying that the game was never ready to come out at the end of 2025, and that's because the leadership team essentially weren't doing their job. allegedly. And then on the 19th of July, Krafton responded to the lawsuit saying that it looked forward to proving its case in court, and insisted that any and all decisions made about Subnautica 2 were made to ensure that it's the best possible game and lives up to fan expectations. Oh, so that's everything. That's the lawsuit, what it alleges, what may have actually happened, and all of the leaked documents ran down for you. Who do you think is in the right here? I am somewhat excited for the trial to start happening if it even gets that far, because it will let us know more details about what was happening behind the scenes in Discovery. However, I just can't help but wish we could just get Subnautica 2 in its prime state whenever that may be. Let me know in the comments what you think about this entire situation and just how messy it's gotten. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Eurogamer. Definitely chuck this video a like if you want more content like this, because I really enjoyed making it. I always love talking about drama. And otherwise, I am now going to go and probably actually play Subnautica, because I've got a hankering to be scared out of my wits by a Leviathan. So I will see you folks next time.